and welcome to Connect the World. I'm Lynda Kinkade, joining you live from the CNN Center in Atlanta. You've been watching our special coverage of the impeachment inquiry, and in just the last couple of hours, Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, instructed Congress to proceed with drawing up articles of impeachment against the President of the United States. She also said the inquiry will continue on Monday with another hearing to present the evidence. Well, let's go now to some of the other news we're following today. Well, right now, the French president is said to be calm and determined as the largest nationwide strike in decades takes over the streets of his country. Railway workers, teachers, emergency room medics, all striking today over the government's plan to overhaul the retirement system. 90% of trains and 20% of flights are cancelled today. The protests have been largely peaceful, but in Paris and here in the western city of Nantes, riot police were seen firing tear gas at demonstrators and hurling objects at authorities. Well, CNN's Melissa Bell is following the strikes from Paris. She joins us now from Gare du Nord train station where a protest kicked off earlier. Melissa, these protesters are certainly saying that they could continue with this protest until Christmas. Just take us through what you've been seeing.
That's right, Lynda. There's the two things. First of all, the nationwide strike that really has paralyzed the country. As you say, 90% of trains that haven't run. People knew this was coming. This is a strike that it was long planned. Many people chose to take the day off. So gridlocked was the country, so difficult was it to get around. Here in Paris, 7 out of 10 metros weren't working. And then there is the march. We're in the middle of it now. We've made our way from the Gare du Nord to Place de République, and it will continue now on to Nation. Perhaps we can show you some of the pictures that we shot earlier, because we've moved away from the worst of the front line, where earlier there was a fair amount of tear gas, projectiles being thrown by protesters towards police. We saw arrests being made, and a great deal of tension between the demonstrators, the protesters, and the riot police on the other side. 6,000 policemen mobilized here in Paris to try and keep the peace. But again, quite a bit of tension. Even now, the smell of tear gas hangs fairly heavy in the air. What was different about this strike was that it wasn't just the unions who were out, the unions who represent those very many public sector workers who will be affected by Emmanuel Macron's proposed pension reform, one that seeks a universal pension system. But for the first time, the Yellow Vests, who for the last year have been holding weekly protests here in France, also joined up with the unions. In general, the Yellow Vests had their protests, the unions would hold theirs. It was the first time that the Yellow Vests joined them, and we've seen quite a few of them out on the street. I think that's what gave this particular march it's much more violent, much more tense air. Now, it isn't over yet. Even as you can see, they're fighting palpably on their way to Nation. Many thousands of the people have been out in the street that we have seen. We haven't got official figures. None have been provided by the Interior Ministry so far. But a very well-attended march and a great deal of anger out here on the streets of Paris tonight, Lynda.
Yeah, and I want to ask you a bit more about that anger. Why people are so upset about Emmanuel Macron's policy, this reform that he's pushing. Just explain what people are saying about that.
Well, here in France, public sector workers have a certain amount of advantages, and in particular pension systems that are particularly generous. They call them special regimes. Emmanuel Macron, who came in, of course, on a platform of reform, has been carrying out a number of reforms. This has been described as his most ambitious. His idea, Lynda, is that France should have a universal pension system, one that is the same for private sector workers, public sector workers, in the way that it functions. So what you see here are people who are out protesting the idea that there's special regimes from which they benefit. These public sector workers will be changed. Their fear, and we've seen this all throughout on their placards throughout the day, is that they're simply going to be made to work longer in order to get their pensions, and that they may get less. So that is the reason for their anger. Now, the last time this very reform was attempted, Lynda, was back in 1995. That's how long it'd been. Now, what happened then? Jacques Chirac was president. Alain Juppé was his prime minister. He sought also to create a universal pension system. 2 million people came out on the street. It was also a bitingly cold winter, just like this one. It took about 3 weeks of public protests and strikes for the government to fold. The big question this time is whether Emmanuel Macron will hold tight, hold firm, and push through past this protest. And already we've heard from the rail workers' unions that this strike, which we knew could be continued, is now going to last until at least Monday, Lynda.
All right, Melissa Bell first there on the streets of Paris. Good to have you with us. Thanks so much. Well, three of the biggest players in Europe are coming together to express concern over Iran. The UK, France and Germany sent a joint letter to the United Nations on Wednesday, saying that Iran has developed ballistic missiles that could conceivably carry a nuclear warhead. Weapons like the Shahab-3 ballistic missile, which you can see here on your screen. That means Tehran would be breaking a UN resolution based off that 2015 nuclear deal. Well, our senior international correspondent Sam Kiley is covering this story for us from Abu Dhabi and joins us now live. Sam, so Iran has certainly put out a strong statement denying this allegation. Take us through their response.
Well, Lynda, they have denied it in a rather kind of beakish, lawyerish kind of way, pointing out that the letter of complaint, it's the fourth one that the signatories to the nuclear deal back in 2015, or at least some of them have put out, have made these allegations about particularly the Shahab-3, saying it is now the sort of weapon with this kind of technology, which means that it could for example, be accurately deployed. It's got a range of 1,000 to 1,100 kilometers. It's capable of carrying a payload of 500 kilograms and a warhead of 300 kilograms. And that, according to the complaint by the British, French and Germans, would indicate that it could be used for a nuclear weapon. And the Iranian response is, well, would, could, likely. There is no legal definition of what a nuclear-capable ballistic missile is, and there will be an endless debate backwards and forwards in that. Really, they're trying to muddy the waters because this is part of an ongoing process of pressure that the international community has been trying to bring on Iran to slow down, in their view, the capacity of the Iranians to build nuclear weapons. And it's coming at a time when things are extremely tense, as you know, Lynda, with Iran. Just in the last 24 hours, the Pentagon has said that a ship was seized in the Arabian Sea coming from Iran, allegedly containing advanced missile parts, destination unknown, although the implication would be probably to the Houthis in the Yemen. At the same time, Pentagon officials are briefing about what they're saying is an increased spread coming from Iran, this thread of joined up, if you like, movements of missiles they've alleged. CNN has reported Pentagon sources saying that short-range missiles, for example, have been shipped into Iraq. So in all of that context, this is a reminder for the international community that the Iranians are being watched and watched closely.
All right, Sam Kiley for us in Abu Dhabi. Good to get that reminder. Thanks so much for that report. Well, still to come here on Connect the World, this is what the climate crisis looks like. A nation parched, robbing millions of people of their basic human needs, food and water. Coming up next, we're going to head to Zimbabwe.